Journalists, on the other hand, shouldn't have what you called a glass jaw when it comes to some of these investigations, citing the First Amendment and threats to the First Amendment.
Well, the First Amendment is a critically important part of the Constitution. It is not unconditional.
There is a particular kind of authority that only comes from having lived long enough to watch history repeat itself, and having the scars to prove you were there the first time. Tom Brokaw, at 86 years old, is one of the last living journalists who carries that authority not as a title on a business card, but as something earned in the field, under fire, across half a century of American storytelling. And now, from the quietude of his later years, the legendary NBC anchor has finally found the words to say something he has long seemed to be holding back about the woman who currently occupies the most prominent seat in morning television. He is speaking up about Savannah Guthrie, and what he has to say changes the conversation. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what Tom Brokaw represented, not just as a broadcaster, but as an institution. He was not simply an anchor in the conventional sense of someone who reads copy into a camera. He was, for decades, the voice that Americans turned to when the world seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Watergate, Vietnam, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Oklahoma City bombing, September 11th. These were not just news stories to Brokaw. They were chapters in a national story that he helped the country absorb and understand in real time. He had a way of conveying gravity without theatrics, of making you feel the weight of a moment without ever losing his composure. That was his gift, and it was one that took a lifetime to develop. Brokaw grew up in South Dakota, a fact that becomes relevant when you try to understand his fundamental character. There is something in that prairie upbringing, in the flat, unadorned landscape of the Midwest, that shapes a person toward directness. You do not grow up in South Dakota and develop a taste for spin or embellishment. You learn to say what you mean, and you learn to mean it when you say it. By the time he made his way into broadcasting and eventually to the national stage at NBC, those sensibilities were baked into everything he did. He was not, by nature, a man who distributed praise casually. When Tom Brokaw called something good, it meant something. He anchored NBC nightly news from 1982 until 2004, and during those 2 decades, he was not merely a fixture of American evenings, he was the fixture. There was a ritual quality to watching the evening news in those years, a sense that the day was not fully processed until Brokaw had framed it. His colleagues Peter Jennings at ABC and Dan Rather at CBS were formidable, but Brokaw held his own with a kind of steady Midwestern solidity that the country found deeply reassuring. He was not trying to dazzle you. He was trying to inform you. There is a difference, and fewer people understand it now than did then. When he stepped back from anchoring in 2004, it coincided with the beginning of a seismic shift in the media landscape. The internet was rewriting the rules. Cable news had already fractured the unified national audience that made anchors like Brokaw possible in the first place. The idea of a single authoritative voice delivering the news to 100 million people simultaneously was becoming a relic, replaced by 1,000 competing voices shouting from 1,000 different corners of an infinite digital space. Brokaw watched this transformation from the sidelines with the measured, somewhat melancholy perspective of a man who had built his career on exactly the thing that was disappearing. And then, gradually, he began watching Savannah Guthrie. Guthrie arrived at the Today Show in 2011, and her background alone made her an unusual figure in morning television. She had practiced law, passed the bar in 2 states, and worked as a litigator before pivoting to journalism. That legal foundation gave her something that most television personalities never develop: the ability to construct an argument in real time, to identify the weakness in a witness's testimony before the witness has even finished speaking, and to pursue a line of questioning with the kind of methodical persistence that makes interview subjects visibly uncomfortable. When she sat across from a politician, she was not simply asking questions. She was building a case. But Guthrie's legal precision was only part of the equation. What separated her from a skilled legal correspondent, and what eventually elevated her to the role of co-host and de facto face of the franchise, was her capacity for genuine warmth. She could move seamlessly from a rigorous interrogation of a sitting senator to a moment of honest, unguarded laughter with a colleague in a way that felt entirely natural rather than performed. That combination, the prosecutorial edge wrapped in approachable humanity, was and remains genuinely rare in broadcasting. Brokaw, according to people who have spent time with him in recent years, has been watching all of this with a growing appreciation that he did not initially expect. Those close to him describe a man who has evolved in his thinking about what morning television is and what it demands of its practitioners. In his era, the line between serious journalism and entertainment was a bright one, and you did not cross it without sacrificing credibility. The evening news was not a place for personal disclosure, for emotional transparency, for the kind of vulnerability that audiences now seem to find essential. You showed up, you delivered the facts, and you left your feelings at the door. Savannah Guthrie lives in a completely different paradigm, and what appears to have surprised Brokaw is how effectively she has navigated it. She does not treat vulnerability as a weakness. When the Matt Lauer scandal erupted in 2017 and fundamentally destabilized the show she had spent years helping to build, Guthrie did not retreat behind professional distance. She sat at that desk and told the truth, that she was heartbroken, that she was processing the news alongside the audience, that she did not have all the answers. It was a moment that could have gone badly in 100 different ways, and instead it became a defining demonstration of her character. She held the room together by refusing to pretend she was not also in the room. Brokaw has noted, in conversations with those in his circle, that this is precisely the kind of moment that reveals what a broadcaster is actually made of. It is easy to perform competence when the conditions are favorable. It is another thing entirely to walk onto a national stage in the middle of a crisis that is also a personal betrayal and find the words to address it with both honesty and grace. What Guthrie did in those days and weeks was not something that could be scripted or coached. It came from a fundamental solidity of character that Brokaw recognizes because it is, in some ways, the same quality that defined his own approach to broadcasting across 50 years. The world that Guthrie occupies, however, is exponentially more demanding than the one Brokaw left behind. The morning show format requires her to operate across a spectrum so wide that it would have been unrecognizable to her predecessors. In a single 3-hour broadcast, she might conduct a substantive interview with a head of state, anchor live coverage of a developing national story, participate in a light-hearted cooking segment, interview a musician about their latest album, and field questions about her own children. Each of these demands a completely different mode of engagement, a completely different kind of presence, and the transitions between them happen in real time in front of millions of people with no margin for error and no second takes. To watch Guthrie navigate that format well, and on her best days, she navigates it extraordinarily well, is to watch someone performing a kind of high-wire act that requires simultaneous access to completely different registers of skill and personality. Brokaw, the man who delivered the most consequential news of several generations with unvarying steadiness, has apparently found himself genuinely impressed by what Guthrie is doing with a format that operates under entirely different laws of gravity. There is also the personal dimension. Guthrie has been transparent about the challenges of her life outside the studio in ways that her predecessors would have found unthinkable. Her path to motherhood was not a simple one. Having her children later in life involved the kind of medical and emotional complexity that she has spoken about openly, and that openness has created a bond with her audience that transcends the usual anchor-viewer dynamic. When she nearly lost the sight in one eye following an accident involving her son, she returned to the air wearing glasses and talking about what she had been through with a candor that was remarkable precisely because it was not calculated. She let the audience see her fear because the fear was real, and she trusts her audience enough to share real things with them. Brokaw, who has faced his own formidable health challenges since his 2013 diagnosis with multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer that he has discussed with characteristic candor in interviews and in writing, understands something about what it means to continue showing up in public when your private reality is genuinely difficult. He has written and spoken about the experience of confronting serious illness as a man who spent his entire career projecting stability and authority, and the complexity of that confrontation. It is not a small thing to face mortality with honesty when your entire professional identity has been built on the performance of invincibility. That shared experience of vulnerability, of continuing to do the work while carrying private weight that the audience only partially knows about, appears to be part of what has deepened Brokaw's regard for Guthrie. He sees in her not just a skilled broadcaster but a person who has been tested in ways that are not visible from the outside and has continued to show up anyway. That kind of resilience is something he recognizes at a cellular level. What Brokaw speaking up about Guthrie represents, in the larger sense, is a kind of benediction from one era of American broadcasting to another. He is not simply offering a professional compliment from a veteran to a colleague. He is acknowledging that the craft itself has changed, that the demands placed on a broadcaster of Guthrie's generation are genuinely different from those of his own, and that she has risen to those demands with a combination of skill and character that justifies the mantle she carries. He is saying, in the particular way that men of his generation and temperament say things, that she has earned it. That matters because Brokaw has never been a man who traffics in false praise or empty graciousness. His reputation was built on saying true things clearly, and that standard applies to how he speaks about people as much as how he spoke about events. When he offers this kind of assessment, it is not the product of politeness or generational obligation. It is a considered judgment from someone who has spent more than half a century in close proximity to excellence in this field and therefore knows it when he sees it. The morning television landscape of 2025 is a strange and difficult terrain. Trust in media institutions is fractured. The concept of a shared informational reality, which men like Brokaw helped to create and sustain, has splintered into 1,000 competing versions of the truth. The very idea of a neutral authoritative voice delivering the news feels, to many Americans, like a relic from a more innocent time. In that environment, maintaining credibility requires something more than competence. It requires the kind of authenticity that cannot be manufactured, the kind that comes from being genuinely, consistently, unfakeably yourself across years of public exposure. Savannah Guthrie has that quality. It is why she has survived and thrived in a role that has broken other people. And it is why, at 86, Tom Brokaw, a man not given to excess sentiment or unearned praise, has chosen this moment to finally say so clearly. He watched the world he built give way to a new one. He watched the granite desk become a glass table, the evening oracle become the morning companion, the monologue become a conversation. And somewhere in all of that change, he found something to admire. A woman who understood what the new era required and delivered it without losing the thing that made journalism worth doing in the first place. Coming from Tom Brokaw, that is not just a compliment. It is a verdict from the last of a particular kind of witness. And it carries exactly the weight you would expect.